Here's a question I want you to sit with for just a moment before we go any further. If every bank in the world shut down tomorrow morning, every brokerage account froze, every currency on earth was declared worthless overnight, what would you still own that has real value? Not paper value, not digital value. Real, physical, undeniable value that nobody can take from you with a policy decision or a printing press. Most people, when they actually think hard about that question, realize the answer is almost nothing. And that is not because they made bad financial decisions. It is because the entire modern financial system was built to keep you invested in assets that only exist inside the system itself. Stocks exist inside the system. Bonds exist inside the system. Bank deposits exist inside the system. The moment the system has a problem, all of those things have a problem at exactly the same time. But throughout 5,000 years of human history, there have been exactly 3 categories of assets that have operated outside every system, outside every empire, outside every currency, outside every bank. And here is the thing that should make you stop and pay attention. All 3 of them are available to you right now, today, without a brokerage account, without a financial advisor, without a minimum investment, and none of them, not a single one, has ever gone to zero in 5,000 years of recorded human civilization. I am going to walk you through all 3, but I want to do something different from most videos on this topic. I am not just going to tell you what to own. I am going to show you the exact historical mechanism that explains why each one has survived when everything else around it collapsed. Because knowing the name of an asset is worth nothing if you do not understand why it works. Understanding why it works is what lets you hold it when everything feels uncertain and every headline is telling you to do something else. Stay through all 3 because they work as a system. The relationship between the first and the third is not obvious until you have heard all of them. And that relationship is the part that actually determines how much wealth you come out of a crisis with on the other side. Let me take you back to something that happened in Austria in 1931, not Germany in 1923, which everyone uses as the hyperinflation example, but Austria, which most people have never heard about in this context. The Creditanstalt Bank was the largest bank in Austria. When it collapsed in May 1931, it triggered a cascade of bank failures across Europe within weeks. Depositors who had trusted that institution with their savings lost everything. Not some of it. Everything. Accounts that had taken decades to build disappeared in a matter of weeks. The people who came out of that period with their wealth intact were not the smartest investors. They were not the ones who had predicted the collapse. They were simply the ones who had a portion of their wealth in things that did not need the bank to still be functioning in order to have value. That is the principle behind everything I am about to show you. Not prediction, not speculation. Preparation. There is a profound difference between those 2 things, and most people confuse them. So here is what those people held. The same things that Egyptians held in 3000 BC. The same things that Romans held after the fall of the Western Empire. The same things that Japanese families held after World War II destroyed their entire financial system. The same things that Venezuelans have been reaching for since 2016 as their bolivar collapsed from usable currency to literally being weighed rather than counted because the denominations became so large. Before I give you the 3 assets, I want to give you one more piece of historical context that I think is more useful than anything else you could hear on this topic. Because most people approach wealth preservation as a question about investment strategy. They want to know which assets go up in price, and that is the wrong question to be asking. The right question is not which assets go up. The right question is which assets survive. And surviving is different from appreciating. An asset that goes up 300% in a decade and then goes to zero has not preserved anything. An asset that stays flat in real terms for a century and then stays flat for another century has done something that almost nothing in the modern financial system has been able to do. Here is a framework I want you to carry through everything I say from this point forward. Every asset that has ever existed falls into one of 2 categories. There are assets that exist inside a system, and there are assets that exist outside of any system. Stocks exist inside the corporate legal system. Their value depends on courts enforcing property rights, on regulators maintaining market integrity, on accounting standards being honestly applied. The moment any of those things break down, stock values become uncertain in a way that is very hard to manage. Bonds exist inside the government fiscal system. Their value depends on the government being willing and able to make good on its obligations. The moment that comes into doubt, bond values collapse. Bank deposits exist inside the banking system. We have seen many times in history what happens when that system has a problem. Cash exists inside the currency system. And every currency system in history has eventually had to reset itself in some way, whether through devaluation, through replacement, through hyperinflation, or through outright abandonment. The three assets I am about to walk you through do not require any of those systems to be functioning in order to have value. They have value for reasons that sit deeper than any legal framework, any central bank policy, or any government guarantee. And that is why they have never gone to zero. Let us start with the first one. The first asset is gold. And I know that some of you already feel like you know this one. Gold is the safe haven. You have heard it 1,000 times, but let me tell you something about gold that most people who talk about it never actually explain, because they are focused on the price movement and not on the underlying property that makes the price movement possible. Gold has a physical characteristic that is shared by almost nothing else on Earth. It is essentially indestructible. It does not rust. It does not corrode. It does not evaporate. It does not decay. It does not become chemically unstable over time. You could bury a gold coin in the ground for 500 years and dig it up, and it would still be a gold coin. The World Gold Council estimates that approximately 90% of all the gold that has ever been mined in all of human history is still in existence somewhere on this planet today. That means the gold that Roman emperors held in their treasury, some of it literally still exists. Maybe in a vault, maybe in a piece of jewelry, maybe melted and recast a dozen times, but it is still here. It did not disappear. Compare that to almost any other commodity. Oil gets burned, wheat gets eaten, copper gets corroded, coal gets combusted, every other physical commodity in existence gets consumed when it is used. Gold gets moved. That single difference is what creates the supply stability that has made gold the monetary anchor of virtually every civilization that has ever existed. And here's what makes this relevant right now, rather than just historically interesting. Central banks around the world are buying gold at the fastest rate since 1950. The institutions that manage the global monetary system, the ones that understand better than anyone else what the actual risks in the financial system look like, are choosing to hold gold as a reserve asset at a pace that has not been seen in decades. When the people who designed the system start hedging against the system using the same asset that civilizations have trusted for 5,000 years, that tells you something important about what they actually believe about the future. Gold does not pay a dividend. It does not send you a quarterly report. It does not grow. But it does something that almost no other asset can claim to have done consistently across 5,000 years of wars, empires, collapses, inflations, deflations, and technological revolutions. It holds its value relative to real things, not perfectly, not in a straight line, but over long periods across multiple generations, an ounce of gold has purchased roughly the same amount of real goods and services throughout recorded history. A Roman senator could buy a fine toga with an ounce of gold. Today, an ounce of gold buys you a fine suit. That is not a coincidence. That is a 5,000-year track record. There is one more dimension of gold I want to add before we move to silver, because it is directly relevant to the world we are in right now and not to some abstract historical scenario. The United States national debt has crossed $36 trillion. The government is running annual deficits of roughly $2 trillion. The Federal Reserve balance sheet is still near historic highs. And simultaneously, as I mentioned earlier, central banks globally are accumulating gold at the fastest pace in decades. These two things, record government debt and record central bank gold buying, are not unrelated. The institutions that manage sovereign monetary systems understand that when debt levels reach certain thresholds, the options available to governments narrow down to a very short list. They can raise taxes significantly, they can cut spending significantly, they can inflate the debt away by printing money and accepting higher inflation, or they can restructure. In almost every historical case where debt reached this level relative to GDP, the outcome involved some combination of the last two options. And in both of those scenarios, gold performs. Inflation drives investors towards stores of value. Currency debasement drives institutions toward assets that cannot be printed. Both of those flows historically have gone into gold. I am not predicting a collapse. I am saying the largest institutions in the global financial system are behaving as if they understand something about the current environment that retail investors generally do not. What they are doing with that understanding is buying gold. Now here is where the story gets more interesting. Because the second asset on this list is related to gold but operates at a completely different level of the economy. The second asset is silver. And silver is not simply gold with a lower price tag. Silver and gold are two fundamentally different tools that serve different functions in a monetary crisis, and understanding the difference is what lets you use them strategically rather than just stockpiling one or the other without a plan. Here is the distinction. Gold is the institutional monetary metal. When governments lose confidence in each other, when central banks need to settle international debts, when sovereign wealth funds need an asset that every counterparty on earth will accept without question, they reach for gold. Gold moves at the level of governments and major institutions. Silver is the transactional metal. It has been used as everyday money for longer than gold has been used as a standardized currency. The word salary has roots connected to Roman payment practices involving silver. In more languages around the world, the word for money traces back to the word for silver than to the word for gold. For most of ordinary human history, when a farmer paid a blacksmith, when a merchant settled a debt at the market, when a family bought grain, they used silver. Not because gold was not valuable, but because gold was too valuable to use for everyday transactions. Silver was the practical layer of the monetary system. That distinction still matters today. An ounce of gold at current prices is worth thousands of dollars. You cannot break a gold coin to buy groceries. But an ounce of silver at current prices is a workable unit of value for real transactions and a localized economic breakdown. Silver is the emergency currency that actually functions at street level. But here is the part of the silver story that has changed dramatically and makes it more compelling today than at almost any previous point in history. Silver has become an industrial necessity in a way that it never was before. Every solar panel manufactured anywhere in the world requires silver. The conductive paste used in photovoltaic cells cannot be replaced with any other material at the same efficiency. Every electric vehicle contains significantly more silver than a conventional combustion engine. Every semiconductor, every 5G component, every advanced medical device that requires electrical conductivity uses silver. And the world is building more of all of these things every single year at an accelerating pace. The Silver Institute has documented 6 consecutive years of structural supply deficits in the silver market. For 6 straight years, the world has consumed more silver than it has pulled from the ground. And the gap is not closing, it is widening as solar and EV production scales globally. You now have an asset with 5,000 years of monetary history that has never reached zero, and simultaneously a modern industrial demand story that is creating a structural supply squeeze in real time. That combination is not something you find very often in any asset class. And there is a specific strategy that connects gold and silver in a way that can multiply your gold holdings without any additional cash investment. It is called the gold to silver ratio trade. Right now, it takes approximately 60 ounces of silver to purchase 1 ounce of gold. That is the current ratio. Historically, during peak monetary crises, that ratio has compressed dramatically. In 1980, during the Hunt Brothers silver episode, it dropped to 17 to 1. In 2011, during a precious metals bull run, it touched 31 to 1. The mechanism of the trade is straightforward. You accumulate silver while the ratio is at current elevated levels. When a monetary crisis peaks and silver catches up to gold, you exchange silver for gold at the compressed ratio. If the ratio drops from 60 to 30, you effectively double your gold ounces without spending an additional dollar. Silver gets you in. The ratio trade builds your gold position. Gold keeps you safe long term. That is how 2 of the 3 never zero assets work together as a system. Now the third asset. This is the one that surprises people, not because it is obscure, but because in the age of digital finance and stock market investing, it feels old. It feels agricultural. It feels like something from a different era. And yet it is older than gold as a standardized currency. It is older than coined silver. It is older than every financial instrument ever invented by human beings. The third asset is productive land, not real estate in the conventional sense. Not a condominium in a city that depends on a functioning economy to have any value. Not a vacation rental managed through an app. Productive land, land that grows food, land that has reliable water access, land that can sustain human life independent of any external system. Let me show you the pattern that repeats in every major historical collapse. Rome falls. The urban merchant class is wiped out. The patricians who hold land in the countryside survive, and their descendants become the foundation of the medieval European aristocracy. The Han Dynasty collapses in China. The landholding families retain power and status through the chaos in a way that the urban commercial class does not. The Black Death kills a third of Europe. The economic disruption is catastrophic for trade and urban commerce. But land that produces food does not become worthless. The people who control it come out of the other side with leverage they did not have before. Weimar Republic hyperinflation destroys German savings. The farmers trading real produce for other real goods preserve their economic position in a way that people holding paper assets cannot. The pattern is not complicated. In a genuine systemic collapse, demand for financial instruments goes to zero because the system that assigns value to them stops functioning. Demand for food never goes to zero. A field that produces wheat in 2026 will produce wheat in 2036 and 2046, regardless of what the Federal Reserve decides to do with interest rates, regardless of what happens to the dollar, regardless of which political party controls the government. The productive capacity of the land exists independent of all of those things. And here's what makes this specifically relevant right now. The United States money supply has grown to over $22 trillion. Roughly a third of every dollar that currently exists was created within the last 5 years. And at the same time, some of the most sophisticated institutional investors and sovereign wealth funds in the world have been quietly accumulating productive American farmland at a pace that has drawn congressional scrutiny. These are not sentimental purchases. Nobody buys farmland in Iowa for sentimental reasons. These are strategic positions being taken by people who understand what history teaches about which assets matter when paper systems come under pressure. You do not need to buy a 1,000-acre farm. Exposure to productive land can take multiple forms. A direct purchase of a small rural property with water access is one way. Farmland-focused real estate investment trusts give you exposure to productive American agricultural land through a publicly traded security. A modest plot in a rural area held as a long-term insurance position is another. The specific form is secondary. The principle is what matters. You need some portion of your wealth in something that generates real output independent of any financial system. Now let me show you exactly how all three work together as a system rather than as three disconnected ideas. Gold covers institutional and geopolitical risk. When sovereign trust breaks down, when central banks need to settle accounts across borders, when the biggest money in the world needs somewhere to go that no single government controls, gold absorbs that demand. It always has, and it is doing it right now. Silver covers monetary inflation and practical transactional breakdown. It gives you the monetary permanence of gold with the added layer of irreplaceable modern industrial demand and the practical usability that gold lacks for everyday exchange at the street level. Productive land covers the scenario where the entire financial superstructure breaks down. When you need an asset that produces something real regardless of what any central bank or government decides to do, land that grows food is the foundation that every civilization in history has ultimately rested on. 3 threat categories, 3 assets, no overlap between what each one protects against. A portfolio that holds none of these 3 has never survived a genuine test across 5,000 years of human history. A portfolio that holds all 3 in some meaningful proportion has never gone to zero, not once, in 5,000 years. Here is the most practical version of this I can give you. You do not have to be wealthy to start. A single silver coin puts you in the same asset class that Romans used against the collapse of the denarius. A farmland REIT allocation puts you in the same category as institutional investors quietly buying American agricultural land right now. A modest physical gold position held outside any financial institution gives you the same foundational insurance central banks are accumulating at record rates. The goal is not to hold everything in these 3. The goal is to hold something in each. A portfolio with no position in any of the 3 assets that survived every crisis in 5,000 years has only ever been tested in good times. Good times do not last forever. The question is whether you are ready for it. If this framing is useful to you, subscribe now because this is exactly what this channel is built around. Not predictions, not tips, frameworks. The frameworks that serious long-term thinkers have used to preserve and grow wealth across generations. And that almost never get discussed in mainstream financial media because they are not tied to anything anyone can sell you a commission on. Drop a comment and tell me which of the 3 you currently hold. I read everyone. Tell me which you are thinking about adding first. See you in the next one soon.